Minister Billström, nice of you to make the time. Thank you for being here.
No problem.
I want to start by talking about the latest developments, if we can, about Sweden's NATO bid. This week, Turkey's President Erdogan called out Sweden, saying it must take a clearer stance against those it considers terrorists. Has Sweden at this stage, do you feel, met all of Turkey's demands in terms of those talks?
Well, the basis for Sweden's and Finland's application to join NATO is the trilateral memorandum signed at the summit of NATO in Madrid last year. And this contains certain items which we have to deal with. And that has been done thoroughly throughout the months which has passed. And I have to say that we are now very close to the moment in time when it is time for the Turkish parliament to start the ratification process.
Do you feel that Turkey is, by pushing further again this week, asking too much of Sweden?
I think it is quite clear that everything within the trilateral memorandum should, of course, be fulfilled. But that has to be done within the limits set by the constitution, the legislation, and principles of rule of law, which applies in Sweden and Finland. And anything outside of those frames, well, that won't be there won't be a possibility for us to meet that kind of demands that are being put forward. And that has to be very clear, and it has been also made very clear to the Turkish government.
I know that Turkey's foreign minister was in Washington this week speaking with Secretary Blinken. I believe you also spoke with Secretary Blinken. I wonder how that may have helped to move things forward, if it did at all.
Well, we appreciate, of course, tremendously the support both from the US, but also from the Canadian government, I should say, for Sweden's and Finland's joint bid to join NATO. And of course, we are also very keen to get this thing moving forward. However, for our part, this is a question of a trilateral memorandum. Any dealings between the US and the Turkish government is on a purely bilateral level. We have to do our job, and we have done it so very well so far.
But surely Secretary Blinken said some encouraging words, I would think, to Turkey's foreign minister in terms of getting this moving forward, given how supportive the U.S. has been of your bid.
Yes, but Secretary Blinken has been very helpful, and he has publicly stated many times that he believes that Sweden and Finland has done their job. He did so at the press conference just in December when I visited Washington together with my Finnish colleagues. So yes, we are very appreciative of the support from the US government.
In spite of you still working in these efforts, of course, NATO Secretary General has said that this would be the fastest process ever. When do you expect it will be finalized? And maybe you can also just explain to us, Minister, for Canadians who know, of course, about NATO, and we've been part of NATO, why it is so important for Sweden right now.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that it is very difficult right now to set a time limit when Sweden and Finland will have become members of NATO. But we're working as fast as we can, and which is only the ratification in the Turkish parliament and the Hungarian parliament that are missing out. And this has been a very, very fast process, the fastest actually in the entire history of NATO. And the reason why we are so keen to join is because of the deteriorating security situation in our neighborhood and in Europe and the world as a whole. It is quite clear that Russia's unprovoked and illegal aggression against Ukraine has turned the world security architecture over, and we need to reinforce our possibility to defend ourselves. And NATO is the only alternative that is foreseeable for us to get the kind of level of security together with Finland that we need. This is the reason why we are so keen to join, and we believe that when we join NATO, we will add things to NATO. We will come with well-trained and well-equipped troops. We are very welcome, and the fact that so many, 28 out of 30 countries so far, have already ratified our applications is a clear token of this.
Sweden also holds the rotating EU presidency, at least for the first half of this year, if I'm not mistaken. And as you know, there have been lots of calls right now for more weapons, and specifically for Leopard tanks. Germany is still considering this and whether or not to allow this. What is Sweden's view on this, and what have you been doing with your allies to try and make this happen?
Well, first of all, yesterday the government decided on the largest military support package to Ukraine so far. here in Sweden. And we are, of course, of a very, very, set ambition that Ukraine should get all the necessary military material it needs in order to gain victories in the field, because it is only on the battlefield that this victory will be won, and this war will end on the battlefield before it can start at the negotiating table. And so Sweden is fully at the side of Ukraine's, and we believe that the European Union should be so also. You're speaking about the Leopard tanks. We are sending the Archer system, the world's perhaps most advanced artillery system, to aid Ukraine with 1 battalion. And I think that this is a sign also of our ambition level in this case. But we are, of course, also supportive and very keen that all other EU member states and all other states in the world, for what that matters, should send all they can to the aid of Ukraine in a moment in time when it looks like things are standing and balancing. And this is the moment when we should step in and help Ukraine politically, financially, humanitarian, and yes, militarily as well.
Can I ask how this NATO bid, of course, was really the end of Sweden's position of military non-alignment for many, many years. How is it going over in Sweden from your perspective in terms of how the Swedish people are receiving this significant pivot in terms of foreign policy and defense policy?
Well, the Swedish people understand this very well, and they understood already at the outbreak of the war in February last year that things were about to change rapidly and fundamentally. And this is also why support in favor of NATO, membership, has grown very rapidly. We are now standing, I saw the latest poll, 77% of the Swedish population are in favor of joining NATO. And this is because the Swedish people understand that we have the most difficult security situation in our part of the world and in the world since the end of the Second World War. That has to be acknowledged, and this is the reason why we should join NATO as fast as possible.
You said that the war will end on the battlefield before there can be any other negotiations. What do you see as sort of the potential end for this? Do you think it is happening soon? I know that's a very difficult question, but just from your perspective, how might this end? When might this end?
This is a very, very difficult question to answer, but part of it has to do with the re-establishment of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which I repeatedly, as a foreign minister, have said is the only way forward. This war started because Russia wanted to encroach on the sovereignty of Ukraine, and all the territories it has occupied should go back to Ukraine. And for us, as a small country, we understand very well what it means when larger countries try to encroach on the territories. This is a question of sovereignty and of the established security architecture in the world. It's a question about whether we should have a world based on rules and norms, or whether it should be, might before right. So re-establishing the territorial integrity is the first step, and it is always a question for the Ukrainian government to say when we should sit down at the negotiating table. No other country can do that apart from Ukraine.
Minister Billström, we thank you so much for making the time for Canada today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.